Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a packed agenda today, and I've brought, as Leah mentioned, my team of subject matter experts from Principal to help me in our discussion. We are going to talk about various, sorry, I can't move my screen, various products and services that Principal offers, and we'll touch on those in just a moment. But I wanted to introduce the team on our call today. Jason Price leads us in our discussion on defined benefit plans. Don Berrigan will talk about our non-qualified solution. Mark Howell is going to introduce you to how we are redefining thinking about plan design and really maximizing our retirement plan benefits. And Lauren Hastings will take us on a journey to legacy assets and what to do when you're working with legacy assets and how Principal differentiates ourselves in the marketplace. We're already going to talk about the pieces that I just mentioned, but I want to just point out some of the other pieces that we bring to the marketplace and where we stand. Employee stock plan services, pension risk transfer, all of these solutions Principal is bringing to our clients and to their participants to provide a truly integrated participant and client experience to reduce administration and make it easier for plan participants. So without further ado, let me introduce Jason to you, and Jason will talk about our defined benefit solution and what differentiates Principal in the marketplace. Jason?
Sounds good. Thanks, Kim, and thanks, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon. I think I've met some of you before, but thanks for your time and your partnership with Principal. I realize it's on me to keep us on time here, so I'm going to kind of jump in pretty quick. Not going to try and make you a DB expert today, I promise. 30 seconds on me, though, before we do that. I am Jason Price, Director of Business Development for Defined Benefit Plans. I'm an actuary by background, so I've been working with these plans for 20 plus years. I did DB consulting for one of the big consulting firms before joining Principal, and hard to believe now I've been with Principal for 17 years based in Des Moines. So before I kind of get into the top three things that we're having discussions with advisors and DB sponsors about, I just want to make sure that I offer up that me and my team stand ready to dive into any prospect that you have or current client that you have. We're happy to kind of go through everything we can see publicly and try and help you tee up a new DB plan in 2024. So with that, three things I'm going to cover. The first is around DB service model. And so that's the first differentiator for Principal. A lot of times in the marketplace, what we're competing against is what you see on the screen here. So a lot of different folks involved. For whatever reason, DB service models historically have been kind of siloed out, and you can see the different circles here kind of representing each silo. But a lot of times it's confusing on who's doing what. There's the actuarial piece, there's the plan administration component, there's the trustee who's holding the DB assets, the advisor is trying to manage things on his or her end, and just a lot of pieces. And a lot of times the communication just very simply breaks down. And so when we're having DB discussions, almost always, one of the things that we're discussing with them is our model. And so you can see here, so we call it our complete pension solution. So Principal Complete Pension Solution. But basically, Principal is able to do everything for that DB plan outside of what you would do on the investments as the advisor. So think about the actuarial consulting, the funding reports, the accounting disclosures, benefit calculations, all of the plan administration. So working with participants, taking those calls, putting the paperwork together. When the auditor needs more information, they would come to Principal. So kind of the day-to-day running of the plan or the plan administration. And then the last thing is the trust and custody. So that's basically the investment platform. And then also all of the retiree services. So as many of you know, in a DB plan, there's usually several retirees that are getting a check every month. We would be making those monthly payments, doing those 1099s, verification of life to make sure everybody who's getting a check should still be getting a check each month. All of those things are done by Principal. And the number one thing that sponsors love about it is they always know who to go to, and their HR team. When they have that old model, a lot of times the HR team kind of gets stuck in the middle, coordinating the actuarial work, the participant interactions, the trustee custodian. All the work that HR does in that kind of older traditional model that we just saw is completely taken off of their plate in our fully bundled service model. So Again, very streamlined, very simple, and usually more cost effective. Now, the last thing I'll say before I move to the next topic is, depending on the size of the plan, we realize that they do not always want us to do everything for that DB plan outside of what you're doing as the advisor. So we do have flexibility, but I kind of wanted to start at the top, and then we can peel back layers as we're having specific discussions if there's things that it makes sense to be handled by other providers or parties. So first thing I wanted to just quickly hit was service model. Number two is what we call an exit strategy or a wind down strategy. And I know that's a mouthful. What does that mean? But about 60% of the defined benefit plans that are still in the marketplace today are what we call hard frozen or soft frozen, meaning they've either shut the plan off to new entrants. So that's a soft frozen plan. A hard frozen plan means they've gone a step further and said, no, nobody in this plan is going to accrue any additional benefits after the hard freeze date. And so what you're looking at here is kind of the life cycle of a DB plan. And we just had a plan sponsor discussion last week that I'm going to kind of use as an example just to kind of give you an idea. But for that plan, it was hard frozen for 10 years. They had $10 million in the DB plan. So that's the asset line is the bottom line on this screen, the darker navy line. But they needed 13 million in the plan to pay everybody out full benefits, lump sum, or annuity. So the lighter blue line on the screen here, it's on the top, is the liability. So in my example, in this discussion, there was a $3 million gap between the liability and the assets. So when we say exit strategy, wind down strategy, the question is, how do we partner with you as the advisor and your client to close that gap so that they can fully fund their plan, middle of the screen there, that full funding dot, and then ultimately pay everybody out, which is that distribution date on the far right side. So again, I'm going to kind of go through this quick, but I want to just give you the framework here for a few minutes. The first piece of the wind down strategy is the quarterly funded status tracking. And so you can see the report here. This comes out quarterly, right after the close of each quarter. It's going to show you and your client exactly how far left they have to go to be fully funded and be able to terminate. A lot of advisors will tell me that they're kind of operating in the dark, don't feel like they're getting good information around kind of where they sit versus where they need to go. And this is the first step in making sure that you and your client have good information around your DB plan. For all of our plans, we do this at least quarterly, but just know as you move up market that we have the capabilities to do this really daily too. So we can do daily funded status tracking on a DB plan. A lot of times makes more sense if you move up market. So piece number one is tracking that plan funding level. Piece number two is what we call a glide path. So conceptually, this is very similar to a target date fund concept in a DC plan that de-risks over time as people get older, closer to retirement. Exact same concept here, except you can see along the bottom that the trigger points of when we work together to de-risk the DB assets are based on the funded percentage of that DB plan. So in my example, that $3 million gap, when that gap is down to 300,000, we will have a lot less risk in that portfolio because they're much, much closer to being fully funded and able to terminate their plan. So the glide path just says how we're going to de-risk gradually and methodically over time as that hard frozen DB plan gets better and better funded over time. So the glide path or roadmap is number two. And then the last piece is the LDI. Stands for liability driven investments. There's a few different ways we can do it depending on the size of the client. I'm not going to go into the details of it here, but just know that we 100% have the tools that we can fully de-risk DB assets as needed. And a lot of advisors and sponsors are wanting to have this discussion today because so many of funding levels have improved, largely because interest rates are so much higher now than they were 3 years ago. So when we talk about exit strategy, wind down strategy, it's tracking the plan's funding level. It's building that roadmap or glide path to follow over time. And then the third piece of it is LDI, making sure that we give you the investment tools to de-risk that DB portfolio as needed. Okay. So that's another huge piece of our conversations. The last thing that I'm just going to hit on real briefly before I turn it over to John. So you saw in Kim's slide that we're a top 4 player in pension risk transfer. Very hot topic right now with defined benefit plans because, again, where interest rates are, and we've sold a lot of those or had a bid on a lot of those deals in 2023, and that's continuing. Nobody else in the marketplace can give sponsors that fully bundled service model, give them that kind of ongoing support, depending if they want to terminate or not, the wind down strategy. But yet also, once they get to that point, help with that pension risk transfer annuity. So again, from day one all the way through the life of that DB plan, Principal can help if it makes sense. So I think that's my time. Again, I'm happy to connect with any of you post webinar with any specific plan questions, but for now, I'm going to turn over to John to talk about our non-qualified solutions.
Excellent. Thanks, Jason. Good afternoon, good morning, I guess, in some areas. So as they mentioned, I'm John Berrigan. I'm part of Principal's non-qualified team. I actually have 28 years in the non-qualified field and have been with Principal for the last 17, and I'm based out of Dallas, Texas. So I'm super excited to have Kim invite me to share a little bit about Principal's non-qualified capabilities. As Kim mentioned, Principal is the largest provider of non-qualified services in the market. So we have over 3,600 409A style plans on our platform, so for-profit plans. If you add in the 457 plans, which are not-for-profit, it's over 5,000 plans. More than 250 employees that are specifically dedicated to our non-qualified services group. So understand these are not qualified plan people that have a little cross-training in non-qualified. These are experts, significant knowledge and experience in that non-qualified environment. Now, I know that's a lot of plans, but I think what's important for this group is to understand that we've segmented our services, our capabilities, and our expertise in order to kind of facilitate all the different sizes of plans. So we can handle the smallest non-qualified plan up to the large and even jumbo size cases in the non-qualified environment. We had a record year last year, and we're on track to beat those numbers this year. So the market just continues to grow on the non-qualified side. Now, there's really three differentiators I want to kind of draw your attention to today. The first is our record-keeping platform. The second is our informal funding capability. And then last, I'll talk a little bit about our consulting services. On the administration side, we have a true non-qualified record-keeping system that we built from scratch. The idea here is that the liability is tracked independently from the asset. So it's not just a 401k platform that's kind of been reconfigured to run a non-qualified plan, which frankly is what most of the market does. And that does two things for us. The first is that it gives us much more flexibility in plan design features. So we're not constrained by the administration platform. So we can really do anything you want to do under the IRS code for a non-qualified plan. So think about unlimited money types for deferral elections. So no restrictions on in-service distribution accounts. Online redeferral of existing accounts. So we don't have to have any paperwork required to be able to do that redeferral. We can do source year administration, which is that kind of contribution-based strategy, which is what most of the market does. But we've also developed a better alternative. At least we think it's a better alternative. Our clients think it's a better alternative for sure. And that's an account-based strategy, which is really more of a distribution organized way to look at the account. So it's much easier for the participants to understand. It's easier for them to manage their participation. It's really, it's more customizable for their specific financial situation is the way I would look at it. Now, the second advantage of the administration platform is really around our capability on our informal funding. So because we separate that liability and the asset, we can do anything you want to on the asset side as well. So we support all the different methods for financing these plans. We're agnostic as to what you and the plan sponsor want to use to informally fund the plan. We can do no funding at all, so liability only. We can do mutual funds, we can do COLI, we can do company stock, we could even do real estate on some plans. So we see all kinds of different scenarios. One of the more popular strategies lately is really to do a dual financing strategy. So have a shorter time horizon asset and a longer time horizon asset. So we can participate in all of those different options to try and find the best situation for your client. All of which, by the way, will show on our website, both the liability and the asset. Now we can do all of that inside or outside of a Rabbi Trust, depending on how you want to set that up. We can model out all the options. So think about the P&L, the balance sheet. We can show you how the taxes differ depending on what kind of product you use. We have top tier products at Principal if you want to buy product through us. And then when you think about you as the advisor, we have multiple compensation options as well. So we can do some customization there also. So not only all the typical strategies, but we can also do our RIA scenarios with no commission options. We can do zero revenue funds. We can even have a no commission COLI product if you wanted to go that direction. Now, the other point on asset management, and this is really something that plan sponsors don't realize, and advisors for that matter sometimes, is how the taxation works when a record keeper rebalances the asset on a non-qualified plan. So most record keepers, because they're on a qualified plan platform, trade the assets on a per person basis. So just like a 401k. So every trade can have unrealized gain that becomes realized, and then that flows up to the plan sponsor. But remember, on Principal's platform, we record keep the asset independently. So rebalancing the strategy, the way we would do it, would be only on a net aggregate basis. So we make a lot less trades for the same amount of activity on the participant side. And so that creates less taxation for the plan sponsor. And so we can make an argument that our platform has a much more tax efficient strategy to handle the asset. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention was our consulting team. So we have a multidisciplinary group of attorneys, CPAs, CFPs, CLUs. We have 2 actuaries on the team, all of whom have extensive experience in their respective disciplines, as well as all aspects of non-qualified plan design and maintenance and funding and legislation. The average market experience for this group is 25 plus years. So there's just no other provider out there that has this kind of expertise included as part of the package when you work with Principal. So we can bring these folks to bear for you and your clients in a lot of different ways. Think about consulting on the different plan design options. What are the best practices for your particular company? Think about all the different features that can be built into these plans. So eligibility, types of compensation, options for distributions. How do you want to build the plan so that we make sure that we are creating a retention situation or motivating employees to do a particular situation? So those are always advantages for us to be able to bring in that consulting team. Also documentation. So we have model documents. We can walk you through all the different documents that are necessary for the plan. All of our documents are executable, so you don't have to go to an ERISA attorney if you don't want to. Both for-profit excess style plans as well as not-for-profit 457 plans. So not only plan documents, but board resolutions, DOL letters, rabbi trust documents. I mentioned that we have trustee services as well. So we have an internal rabbi trust company. So if you use our trust company, we have really a less expensive alternative because we can do it more efficiently inside of our company. We can do directed trust or discretionary rabbi trusts. We're happy to work with a third-party trustee if you'd prefer to do it that way. So soup to nuts, really design, implementation, the financing of the plan, the ongoing administration. Hopefully you can see that Principal has extensive expertise and capabilities on the non-qualified side, and we'd welcome the opportunity to work with you and your clients in the near future. So next up is my friend Mark Howell, and I'm always impressed how Mark and his team are able to kind of find that diamond in the rough, if you will. So they do really a holistic assessment of companies' benefit plans. They look at all the different programs and really find where they can get more benefit for the same amount of money. So Mark, tell us more about what your group does.
All right. Thank you, John. And what John didn't mention is that he is my go-to person when I have questions as to how to record keep highly unusual designs, we will phrase them as. So he still answers my emails, though. So apparently we're still friends, still doing well in that regard. And I appreciate all his help with that. So good afternoon and morning to John's point. My name is Mark Howell. I also am an actuary. We're apparently surrounded by them today, working with Principal. But I think the key is to think about kind of why myself and my team are here at Principal, why we've been built out the way we are. And the reason for that is there's a significant disconnect within the retirement industry, if you stop and think about it. And what I mean by that is most of us on this webinar, whether you're an actuary, a non-qual specialist, a salesperson, investments, consulting, almost doesn't matter. All of us, when we meet with a client or a prospect, what we want to talk about is their retirement plan, right? I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing. We're retirement consultants. We want to talk about retirement plans. But the reality of life, if you stop and think about it, is when you're trying to talk to somebody in HR or somebody in finance, at a client, at a prospect about their 401k or their non-qual or whatever, the reality of life is they're thinking about a lot of other different things right now, right? We just came through sort of COVID. You had the situation of, how do I keep my people safe? How do I help everybody work remotely? Now it's how do I get all those remote workers back to the office, right? How do I deal with some of the complexities that are going on with that? There was the Great Resignation. There were a whole lot of things that have been happening. I don't think anybody said there was the great awareness of 401k plans. I don't think I read that article out there in the financial press. So our team is here to help leverage the retirement program in a way to try to address some of those actual needs of the client, working together with our consulting partners on mutual clients. So I think the easiest way to kind of describe what I do is to walk you through a quick example, and then I'll close up by kind of talking about how it matters to all of us. So this is a situation. It was a mutual client. A consultant had come to us and said, look, we've got this situation. It's an organization. They are not in the logistics industry, but for this particular organization, CDL drivers are apparently a big issue, right? People with a commercial driver's license, they're having problems getting them. They're having problems keeping them. Basically they just came to us and said, in essence, do you have anything we can do to try to help out this client? So we did some research and we came out and then presented with a consultant. And what you're going to see is kind of a high level version of what we presented. Certainly, I'm not going to give you the horrible nitty gritty that you can get sometimes from an actuary. But what you see on the left is a comparison of this particular organization in the dark blue versus some other particular competitors of theirs within their industry, right? So we looked first at the retirement program. We said, okay, how does it match up versus others in your industry? And what you see on the left there is it looks pretty good. But then we said, based on what your consultant shared with us, we wanted to understand how your organization matches up retirement program wise versus other large competitors who specifically employ that key skill set, that CDL licensed driver. And here what we noticed is, obviously there's a very significant difference, right? If you compare them within their industry, they look good. If you can compare them versus logistics organizations, maybe they don't look quite so good. But there's actually a wrinkle underneath the data here in that while some of their competitors in logistics are offering maybe 6%, maybe 9% of salary as a retirement contribution each year, the reality is they had significantly longer vesting periods than this organization did. They required you to be there for between 5 and 7 years sometimes to get that full benefit. Whereas this client we were speaking with actually had immediate vesting. Basically, you walked in the door, boom, you were vested. On the right, we also did compare them against large regional employers. The reason we always do that is, even though it's outside of your industry, there are certain jobs and certain skills that, frankly, everybody needs, right? I mean, everybody needs HR staff. Everybody needs, accountants, things like that. So what happens is, sometimes it's also interesting to understand what some of the large regional employers are doing to understand how they're kind of setting the market in the locations in which you operate. So this is what we saw, looking, pretty good versus industry, maybe not so good for CDL drivers. So we asked the question then, and I think this is a key question to ask sometimes. When you're trying to hire somebody with a CDL license, is the first question out of their mouths, what's your 401k match? And if you stop and think about that, the reality is that's probably not the case for not only CDL drivers, but pretty much most positions out there, right? The retirement program is something that is nice. It certainly helps recruit and retain, but it's probably not the main determinant. Although, as an aside, I will mention actually when I was speaking with my boss and kind of negotiating to come over here, I actually apparently asked so many questions about the principal retirement programs that he told me flat out I had A, made him educate himself on it, and B, had asked more than anyone ever had about retirement. However, I told him that since I work in retirement plan design, that's exactly what he wants out of somebody he's hiring for that, right? So we looked at CDL drivers, though. We looked at their the open positions out there. And we came back and talked to this client about the fact that it's not necessarily, the retirement program that people are advertising, but it's the sign-on bonus. That's a really big thing. A lot of them have very similar salary structures. A lot of them say things like, try to get you home on the weekends, things like that, obviously matter. But the reality is kind of front and center in bold print on these advertisements for these open positions was a sign-on bonus. And this particular client we were talking to, this was an area where they really were falling behind when they were trying to recruit these people. They were offering about a $5,000 sign-on bonus. As you see here, it looks okay. It's certainly not going to necessarily get anybody's attention, though. Now, the nice thing is with these two pieces of information and kind of knowing what we knew, we were able to then have a really good conversation with the client around some possible design changes that we could make. And what we told them first off, we said, look, you already have auto enrollment at 6%. Your people are already getting the maximum amount anyway. Let's add the auto escalation at the very least and just sort of crank up those savings rates, deliver better outcomes for your participants. At the end of the day, that to me is kind of a no-brainer. That's what everybody wants. But then the next thing we discussed with them was the fact that because their program was a little bit higher than others in their industry, we felt they could actually reduce their retirement program by about 0.5% of salary per year. What that was going to do was actually deliver savings to this organization of between $4 and $5 million. We also mentioned to them and pointed out that their immediate vesting was highly unusual within their industry and within CDL drivers. If they moved merely to a 2-year cliff vesting, they could actually recapture another $2 to $3 million. So it's about $6 to $8 million worth of cost we were able to recapture for the organization. And that started a really good conversation with ourselves, with a consultant right there, all sort of 3 groups kind of having just sort of almost a brainstorming session of what do you do with that $6 to $8 million then, right? We could increase sign-on bonuses. We talked about adding retention bonuses because during this conversation, the client mentioned, hey, our CDL drivers, if we can keep them for 3 years, that's even better because then accident rates go down and our insurance rates go down. There's a significant bottom line impact to us. So we started having conversations around retention bonus offerings. This is probably when I called John Bergen specifically to talk to him about how to record keep these sorts of things. So there's a lot of different things you can do. And what you see here is really a situation where working together with that consultant on that mutual client, we're able to really look at the retirement program, but use it in different ways to identify ways to try to deliver that recruitment and retention that was top of mind for the client. Now, the value of doing this sort of thing, I think to me, somewhat obvious, but just to sort of summarize, for all of the consultants and advisors on the webinar, certainly being able to have these kinds of conversations is only going to amplify your opportunities. If you're out there trying to call on somebody and one of your competitors is calling as well, if that competitor is talking about fees, funds, and fiduciary, and you're talking about, hey, here's how I saved another client $6 to $8 million and helped them hire the key skilled people that they needed to run their organization, my guess is they're going to call you back first. It's going to help you deepen your relationships and really deliver some of these next level solutions for your clients. For the plan sponsors and the clients out there, in a perfect world, it's going to help them quicken that recruitment, right? There's a cost to having positions open for many days. So if we can get the recruitment quicker, if we can keep people longer and position them to have better outcomes and be able to retire in a timely manner, that's great for plan sponsors and employers. And then for the participant, obviously, if you can get into a better position, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're going to feel better about your financial security. And again, if you can retire in a timely manner, there's benefits to everybody for that. Now I'm going to hand it next to Lauren Hastings. She actually specializes in healthcare. I do a ton of work with her. I think her depth of knowledge in this is fantastic, and I'm really excited for her to tell us about her legacy asset solutions we offer.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be with you. Now, I'll begin my conversation with some comments about what do I even mean by legacy assets. We call them different things. So just to orient everyone to this part of the discussion, back in 2009, the Department of Labor said for nonprofit plans, you no longer have to operate in this multi-vendor environment. However, we've simplified your life there, but we haven't necessarily simplified your life when it comes to the investments, namely group or individual contracts that your participants hold, because those investments come with the participant, meaning it's almost inherited baggage that the plan sponsor or you as advisor are now responsible for. And so what happened was, back in 2009, when the DOL simplified this, these legacy assets were still hanging out there, either these group or individual contracts. Now, that causes a lot of complications for both the participant and the plan sponsor. On the left, you see some of the plan sponsor challenges, right? Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is, how will my plan remain compliant if I am operating in the dark, if I'm blind to what else is out there? And so you'll see that we've bolded 5500s, audits, loans. And the reason is, when it comes to loans, if I don't know that one of my participants, Jane Doe, has an existing loan elsewhere with those contracts held elsewhere outside of my immediate purview, how am I ever able to know what she is able to take as a loan in my plan? Or when it comes 5,500 and audit season, it often requires the plan sponsor to go out and take action to retrieve the data necessary to get their audits completed and to file those 5,500s. For the participant, it creates obviously the things that we've noted here, but some other items. Just the fact that they have multiple places to go to, a disconnected experience, and there are a very disparate range of other issues that the participant faces. Now, I've set the stage. I'm going to go into something that's truly different in the marketplace. And for those of you who do have expertise when it comes to nonprofit plan sponsors, before you start thinking, oh, I've heard of the common remitter solution. The common remitter solution requires that you or the plan sponsor take action to go retrieve the information, meaning common remitter makes it available, but you have to go out and hunt for it. This is where Principal comes in and has a very different solution. So if you've got nonprofits you're either trying to serve today or attract, this is an area that I'd like you to keep in the back of your mind. It's Principal's solution with NBS, National Benefit Services. In this solution, it is the only one that, number one, keeps a plan completely compliant and does the hunting for you. Every night, NBS goes out as a third party of ours with whom we have contracted and goes to 95 different contract providers. And each evening they go out and they retrieve all the values of those contracts, those investments, those loans, the data, and they feed it to Principal.com. And the beauty of that is there's no action required on the part of you or the sponsor. We've done the legwork. And each night it's electronically fed to us. And so the next day when Jane Doe logs on or goes to the app to take a loan, we already know that Jane has an existing loan elsewhere. And when Jane logs on to our account, she'll see this view, where off to the left, you see that box in blue noted. It shows the external assets that are held at that other group or individual contract. We make everything a very singular, simple experience. Now, the other benefit, not just to the participant in this case, is that come audit or 5,500 season, Principal, of course, sends out our 10 questionnaire piece to the plan sponsor. Is this still the same EIN? Do you still have the same address? The things that we know about them. But we send out a questionnaire on those legacy assets to NBS. And they complete it. One less thing on the plan sponsor's plate. One less thing for you to sweat when it comes to keeping those plans compliant. Because we've taken that action, we do the work, and then we dish up the 5,500 data for those legacy assets. We make this as simple as can possibly be. And it's a very different experience than common remitter, again, where action's required. At Principal, we take that on, we do the heavy lifting, and we ensure compliance. It is the only solution on the marketplace right now that truly keeps the plan compliant. And I want to emphasize, double click on that, the only. This is where if you've got a nonprofit with whom you're working, we can present something truly different to them. Now, it also makes each of our lives far simpler. So truth be told, for those of you working on these relationships, you certainly don't want to get the call from a plan sponsor who just doesn't know where to go. This is something that Principal will do to make your lives simpler.